Now, this, I believe, this argument which the Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using here, I think we need to learn a lot from it. Because in this day and age, when people reject Islam and they reject the Quran, people might not reject it because they don't believe in a concept of resurrection per se. I mean, especially here in the Western world, generally, you know, it has a Christian heritage. They generally believe in many cases that there exists a resurrection and that probably one day we'll all stand before God. So they're quite different to the mushrikeen of Arabia in that sense. But the psychology or the rationale behind the argument is very similar. So the Quraysh rejected the Quran because of its teachings pertaining to matters of Aqidah. But nowadays what's happening? The disbelievers are rejecting the Quran because of the teachings related to what? Not matters of Aqidah, but matters of Sharia, matters of laws and regulations. And this is what you'll find. Go to any debate between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, you'll find most of the time will end up being a rant by the non-Muslim speaking about what? He'll start saying, oh, the Quran, you know, it believes in cutting the hand of the thief and stoning the adulterer, etc. It generally always ends up going down that line. So if we want to convince them, if we want to convince the disbelievers about Islam, what do we need to convince them of first? That this statement, this Quran, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what we need to convince them. If we can convince them of that, then everything will naturally fall into place. And so this surah is teaching us this. All of these ayah, all of these things that will happen is that إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, and then on the day of resurrection, عَلِمَتْ نَفْسٌ مَا أَحْضَرَتْ, all of that, they will believe in it if they believe in that this Quran is the word of truth. Because at the end of the day, many of the rulings in Islam, do we agree with them because they all make sense to us? I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, if we didn't decide to become Muslims, would we adopt all the rulings of Islam because they make sense to us? No. Quite honestly, no. We wouldn't. And that's because the nature of man, Allah has created him very weak. He will pass very, very weak judgments, and all of his judgments will never align itself with the decisions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not the nature of man. He's very weak and limited by nature. And so, you know, you can try to convince a non-Muslim all that you like about the particular rulings of Islam, but it will never work. I mean, maybe one or two rulings, you might just be able to convince them that the hijab, for example, is good. But then they say, what about this? What about that? What about the distribution of inheritance? What about the laws you have pertaining to combat and jihad? All of these things. We only believe in these rulings because we believe that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.